Hello everyone, and a good day to all of you. I wanted to talk today about how to properly set up your length of pull on a rifle. What that is the distance from the rear of the stock to the trigger itself. Probably, if you've been around firearms for any length of time already, you're probably already familiar with the technique where you do an L sort of with your elbow and just measure from there. It's a lot easier than doing an actual measuring tape and all that. But I wanted to talk about this today because I've seen a decent amount of people that aren't really set up properly with length of pull. It seems like there's even today, a fair bit of confusion around it. And furthermore, I did want to talk about that L technique because that is a little bit outdated, but I do think that that's a very good starting point. So just up front, what I would recommend, and then I'll explain why, is ideal length of pull, I would say, is to do this L. And what that is you make a 90-degree L with your elbow, and then you would just set your rifle in here, and you would just see if your finger matches up pretty well with the trigger. Now, I would recommend one click in, and the reason for that L technique is really designed for the older types of rifles which don't have a pistol grip and also use a different shooting stance. When you have the more modern rifle, especially when you start getting to these more vertical grips, like this one right here, you'll be a lot better off by just dropping it one notch in, and then for me that's always been what has worked well. So here is just a traditional bolt action rifle, or a socket to be specific. So like I said, that L-shaped technique right here, you can see this actually is a significantly shorter length of pull than most people are used to, myself included. I prefer much longer length of pull. So you can see exactly where my trigger finger measures up, like I mentioned. Now, what I was talking about with that technique, it is very different from what most people are used to with a modern fighting shooting stance. With a lot of the traditional rifles, they would tend to teach you to shoot bladed. And the reason for that is for use with a sling, specifically with Wayland style slings, but you can do this with pretty much any sling. And what they would do was they would wrap their arm around this, kind of just a hasty sling in this case, which would really put a lot of tension onto your arm, tighten up your whole stance. So you would go more bladed, like I said, more so facing you compared to the target. And compared to your normal elbows in, you would actually have your elbow straight out. So when you do this, it's actually very comfortable to have just that exact L shape. So back to the present, the regular, more modern rifle here. So like I said, the differences and the reason you'll want a slightly shorter length of pull than that L technique recommends is because now you're facing the target and elbows are in, you have an actual pistol grip rather than your wrist being like this. If you have too short of a length of pull, especially with those older rifles with a traditional rifle grip, you're gonna feel a lot of wrist tension right here. And if it's particularly bad, you'll start to feel it down here too. It's less pronounced with a more vertical grip. And so what that is gonna cause if you have a lot of wrist tension going on is you're not gonna be able to properly squeeze the trigger consistently or very effectively at all. So you probably won't notice much of a difference at closer ranges, but especially as you start shooting further, when you're unsupported, you're not going to be very accurate just because you can't physically shoot and pull that trigger consistently, like I said. Furthermore, same thing applies if you're way too long. If you have particularly short arms and you're way out here, you're not going to be able to get a good grip on the trigger either. Furthermore, if you're further out than you need to be, it's just going to be overly fatiguing, and there's no need for that. And also certain optics, which is another point I'm going to discuss later. If you're way too far out with your length of pull, you'll start causing issues with the eye relief on a lot of them. So, just to demonstrate this very quickly, I'll actually go through the whole process. So starting right here with this fully collapsed, like I said, I would kind of take my L on the elbow, and if you're doing this for the first time, obviously you would just want to go a click at a time and just keep gauging it over and over. And I would highly recommend having a collapsing stock because this isn't just going to be a set it and forget it thing. Obviously, if you're going slick and just standing, you'll pretty much always use the same adjustment point right here. But once you start wearing heavier clothes or a plate carrier or shooting from prone, you'll want to keep changing this to have a proper length of pull and to maintain it. But going back to here, so going out. Now I did want to address another point right here regarding just a little bit of shooting posture and as it also relates to length of pull. So I've seen a lot of people kind of recommending the nose to charging handle technique. This is actually something I greatly dislike. I've always kind of thought this was a bad technique that can probably get a new shooter up to speed fairly well, but it kind of is ultimately a pitfall because it's a weak stance overall. So if you're not familiar, what the nose to charging handle technique is, it's something specific to ARs or anything with a rear charging handle, where you quite literally put your nose to the charging handle and you're using this as a tactile point of contact, so you always maintain the same cheek weld or stock weld, whatever you want to call it. The issues I have with that, obviously, hopefully you were kind of paying attention. If not, I'll just probably replay the footage right here. When I was shooting, you'll notice I had my neck pretty straight up. You can see I'm just pretty much standing normal. I mean, I'm in a more fighting stance with my legs, but everything here is just straight. Rifle comes to my eye. I'm not going down to the rifle, and then I fire. Additionally, there is other ways. For example, you could glue like a little ball bearing here, a little bead, or just use tape as another tactile reference point, or cheek risers, etc. So wouldn't recommend bothering with that for the nose to charging handle technique. Furthermore, another issue with the nose to charging handle technique is it's going to give you, to properly do that and maintain that position, you're going to end up with a much shorter length of pull than is ideal. And also, if you're doing a proper fighting stance where you're facing the target like this, even if you drop this in all the way, it's pretty much impossible unless you start blading. Again, that's why I wanted to bring up the traditional rifles. So if you're more bladed shooting like this, then yeah, your neck's going to be more forward. So it makes it a little more possible there, but yeah, wouldn't recommend that. It's a bit of an outdated technique. A lot of the people that do advocate for it are usually vets from seems like the later Cold War era to the maybe early to mid GWAT. Apparently, from what I've read, that was actually in the Army Marksmanship Manual at the time, but just as an interesting little note, that's no longer in there. I did look up the latest edition, and yeah, they don't really recommend that anymore. And furthermore, if you're shooting suppressed, but even if you're shooting unsuppressed with a gassier rifle, you're going to get a lot more gas to your face because you have gas coming out of that charging handle. And another reason I do like the heads-up shooting position is because it's the exact same when you're shooting with CBRN gear, nods, etc. That way it's less differences you need to remember depending on whatever you're wearing or doing. Now I wanted to circle back to a point I made earlier regarding collapsing stocks. So I would highly recommend having a collapsing stock over just a regular stock, even if you have just a standard fixed stock that fits you well, because whatever you're wearing and whatever shooting position you're going to be in is going to change the length of pull that's ideal for you. So hence why I'm wearing a plate carrier right now. What I would recommend is if you're shooting with a plate carrier to just have your optimal length of pull, like I recommended setting up, and then just drop it in by just one click usually is good, unless you have an abnormally large plate carrier. And same would apply if you're wearing, for example, a winter jacket. If you're shooting from prone, usually what I've found is I want to go a little bit longer, so usually I'll just extend this out all the way. I am on the taller side and have longer arms and everything, so I could actually, if this could extend further out, I could probably benefit from that too. If you are particularly tall and you are running into that same issue, then one thing you could look into is there are longer stocks. For example, I just have a HK Slimline stock on here, which is pretty much the same length as just your regular AR waffle stocks, for instance. But on one of my other ARs, I have, for example, a Viltor E-Mod, and that is a little longer, so you could get something like that. Tons of other stocks like that too. I'm just using that one as the example because that's the one I have experience with. So in most situations, that is what I would recommend for length of pull to set it up optimally for you. But there are a few exceptions that I wanted to bring up, namely certain optics. For example, I have a magnifier on here. So if you're running something with a usually magnified optics, something that has a pretty limited eye relief like this magnifier does, you might need to end up going with a shorter length of pull than would be ideal for you. It's just kind of how it has to be if you do have something with eye relief, because you do need to just have a good sight picture. So if that does apply, then, you know, maybe drop it in by one click. Another point I do see people kind of bring up occasionally is if you have a dedicated home defense rifle that's maybe on the particularly long side. This one's a little long, for example, but you might, there is a point to be made for the overall length being quite a bit longer. For example, if you need to move through a lot of doorways and all that obviously it's more maneuverable when it is like this. But overall, I do think there's more benefits to having a properly set length of pull. Obviously, I'm not some CQB specialist. I'm a civilian, and I assume most people are who are watching this video. If not, this doesn't really apply to you. But I do also see some people bring up the point that having this collapsed all the way in does bring the center of balance more comfortably in towards the body, which is true. And I guess if you're doing a lot of closer quarter stuff where maybe the pinpoint accuracy of having properly set length of pull wouldn't matter as much. But like I said, if it's too far in, especially if you're on the taller side, you're going to be really cramping up your wrist to try to get this close in. It's not as pronounced on something with a more vertical pistol grip like this compared to your traditional rifle grip, but it is still there, certainly. So I hope that this video was helpful to someone out there for setting up proper length of pull on a rifle, and also why it is important to set up the proper length of pull. To just briefly highlight some of the points of this video, so what I would say to find your optimal length of pull is to just do the traditional 90-degree L technique with your elbow, put the stock there, and then just measure it, get it to exactly where it needs to be, and then just drop it one click in for these types of pistol grips. And if you're wearing plate carriers, or if it's winter, stuff like that, you might need to do an additional click in to maintain that comfortable length of pull. Keep in mind that it's always changing depending on wherever shooting position you're firing from, and also whatever you're wearing. Other than that, let me know if you have any other questions or any additional input in the comments below. I always love to hear that and always do read it. Thank you all for watching. Take care, and I hope to see you all in the next one. See you then.